Is it going?
It's going.
Oh, hell yeah. I guess that means we should start.
Yeah.
Make sure everything's in order. Thank you all for coming. As you know, I recently graduated from grad school. And thank you. I'm here to talk about some things that well, let's adjust the audio before we begin.
We're good.
Is this a good level for everyone?
Yeah.
I'll have some music from a playlist I made like half an hour ago playing in the background. But hopefully it works. This is going to be about what I learned in grad school. And my quest for knowledge begins, as it does most often nowadays, with a YouTube iceberg video that I got recommended to me in my algorithm. That being this image. Has everybody here seen a video like this before?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. For any new gens in the audience, this is basically the Mr. Incredible Become Uncanny meme, but in a different format. I heard a weird music iceberg, and deciding to waste my time, I ended up watching it. It was January of 2021, I was sick with COVID. And as I went down the weird music iceberg, I found out about this band called Negativland. This is the original sound collage plunderphonics band from the 80s. They kind of pioneered the genre on their radio show. Does anybody here know or a fan of Negativland? Oh, hell yeah. Well, basically, I started listening to their two newest albums, True False and The World Will Decide. One is about the collapse of the world, the other is about the progress of the world. And in True False, there's this one song called Destroying Anything, which you're hearing the instrumental for right now. And there's this part in that song where they go, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism."
So true.
And you can
And you can fuck animals or whatever, but you can't imagine the end of capitalism. Naturally, this quote caught my eye, to say the least. So I looked it up. And where did I find it? Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. Even though he himself was pulling from Frederick Jameson. This is what I learned in grad school / why I could never be an English teacher. Basically what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to describe a web of, books that I read in the past 2 years that are interconnected to other things like art or, I guess art is all encompassing, albums or movies. It's something that may involve shit you care about. It's something that may not involve shit you care about. But my hope is that somewhere along the way, I'll hit one thing where you're like, I know what that is, and you'll hop on the train. I did try to explain it in terms of culture most of us here might be familiar with. But I'm also recording this, and I may put it somewhere someday, and maybe somebody in the future is watching and is like, I don't know any of this shit. But who knows? Maybe it will give them something new to read. I also dedicate this presentation to Orban, Crokid, and Amber, or anybody who got me excited about reading again. But this isn't just about books. Oh shit. Wait.
You need to move your mouse.
How did that happen? Oh fuck, okay. This is also about mental health. And that's important. So now you have no choice but to sit here and learn about how to have a happy brain. This chart could be entirely bullshit, but let's be real. It's turbulent times, and I want to look out for all of you. So we're kind of going through my journey to never have a bad day ever again. Of course, all of this is related to a certain album, Folx, by Friends and. Has anybody here heard this album?
Yeah.
Okay, we got some people in the audience. There's a lot of talk in my circles about this album. I, had my doubts, to be honest. People have long talked, even since the day of 100 gecs, about irony in music and sincerity in music, and I wasn't sure. And also, I heard, things about the singing and all that, and My friend B over here really liked it though, and was telling me to listen to it. So I decided to give it a chance. I looked up its Bandcamp, and I was quite struck by the fact that it heavily referenced books I had been reading for the last 2 years of my life. It was honestly kind of frightening. Needless to say, I cried like 7 times listening to it for the first time. Once, even before I listened to the album, when I read this overview about their missions. This is a huge wall of text, but I'm sure there are several which kind of resonated with me specifically. One maybe being about the time they spent working as a corporate creative, which I myself have been in the process of doing at grad school. This album is related to many things, but we're going to kind of focus on 4 in particular right now, right here tonight. One being the previously mentioned Mark Fisher, the other being Capitalism Schizophrenia, the third being My Little Pony, the fourth being the genre now called Stomp Clap Hey, even though that was a word invented by Spotify algorithms that they projected onto the music that we have now retroactively called it in the present. Keep that in mind for later.
They've done this multiple times.
This is going to come back.
It's just like hyperpop.
It is, in some ways, it's like hyperpop. Before this album came out, when I had gone to grad school, I had started reading these 3 books going off Negativland. I read them in this order, but you know, this was my first time reading critical theory, which can be tough to get into. And I enjoyed them, but I don't really know if they became important to me until I read Ghosts of My Life. And in some ways, I think this is the order that kind of makes most sense to talk about them. Ghosts of My Life first. Ghosts of My Life is a book, as it says, about depression, hauntology, and lost futures. Hauntology is a term related to nostalgia. This is a screenshot of maybe the first time I ever experienced nostalgia. I didn't even know how to spell it. But I was going back to rewatch Pokemon. I was probably like 11. I had gotten into Pokemon in the 2nd grade. And it was the first time a hobby kind of repeated in some way. But what is hauntology? I was familiar with the term from websites like RateYourMusic, which have and their signature albums of the internet age, such as Boards of Canada's Music Has the Right to Children. Basically, hauntology in this album is an exploration of maybe how nostalgia happens. That being futures denied to us by capitalism. Some of you might be familiar with this album. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. B actually has a mug of this album in the house. Some of you might be familiar with this song. Wait, no, not this one. This one.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. This is actually an album that shows up in Ghosts of My Life in a chapter called about the idea of party hauntology. One section of this chapter focuses on artists such as Drake and Kanye West and the idea of them being at the top of it all and still not really having everything. But it also speaks to artists such as David Guetta, Flo Rida, and Calvin Harris, as well as will.i.am, of course, about, you know, these songs that are constant euphoria. Songs like I Got a Feeling, which, as Mark Fisher puts it, comes off more like a memory of a past pleasure than anticipation of pleasure that is yet to be felt. I don't know if anybody feels this way about the song. Personally, when I was getting worried about money, before I even read this, I would get high and watch the Boom Boom Pow music video, which works, to say the least. And this is an attitude that I do see in, of course, my limited kind of algorithm that I get to myself. But I get the shit like this recommended all the time. The adulthood we were promised, like in those 2000s illustrations. I mean, to be honest, when I did listen to The End, I did kind of get these feelings. To be honest, listening to Silver Set at the previous, where we just attended, Winnie City PonyCon 2026, it kind of felt like actually living this illustration, to say the least. So good job to Silver. And as well as all the musicians at Winnie Pony City Con 2026. Of course, I felt it. I'm destroying this little block over here. I felt it in albums I had known myself growing up. This is the first album I ever listened to. Vampire Weekend, Modern Vampires of the City, which I listened to in 2013 when it had just come out. I remember one time we went to Pittsburgh and we had this on repeat. I must have heard it like 4 times. And there were 2 songs that resonated with me in that era. One being Unbelievers and the other being Yahe. Because I think, being a suburban Christian boy, this is the first time that I can think of 2 songs that sort of had a complicated relationship with religion. Which, that's some mind-blowing shit at that time. But, needless to say, for Vampire Weekend, there's always kind of been a running joke with them about being like, a white band or a rich band, or, Anthony Fantano once said, having privilege as an aesthetic, which I do kind of see in the music, right? But needless to say, I would listen to an album like this and it would give me a lot of hope. It's right there in the title, Modern Vampires of the City. It was creating this idea of New York City where, life wasn't, it had its troubles, but also had these profound moments. And I constructed this idea of what it was like to live in New York. I remember I was originally going to make a YouTube video about this concept and a tweet that is almost a year old now, that being a tweet that called Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros the worst song ever made. Do we have any Edward Sharpe fans in the audience? Uh-oh. I stand alone. Because this album, Up From Below, I'm going to play the ends of it. This isn't the right one. No. Wait. We'll get to that later. This album, which appears on folx at the ends, literally gave me beatnik fantasies as a child. I would listen to it and I would imagine this like cartoon episode where my friends and I would flee into the desert to go reunite my friend with his like country singer crush. And along the way we like bond and shit. This video is also going to be about the radio station that I kind of grew up with, WFUV, and the music they would play, and very much kind of adjacent to Edward Sharpe and the stomp, clap, pay stuff. It's easy to make fun of those things nowadays, but what I wanted to capture in the video was like that sort of loss of innocence I suppose I had with it. Tweets like that which I encountered, and the juxtaposition of it against what I imagined as a kid, right? It was basically saying we're a less hopeful society now, which really might not be that deep, but little did I know there was more of an iceberg to go down. Another band that radio station would play frequently was Michael Franti. And, I loved Michael Franti as a kid, but I think no better illustration exists of why this genre is criticized than looking at Michael Franti's career span. We're going to start with the album on the left, which came out in the 70s and sounds like this. Let me find the And now we're going to compare it with the album on the right. Maybe you've heard this one? And if you don't recognize this part, maybe you recognize the chorus. This isn't the chorus, but we'll get there. This is an idea that is explored in folx, to say the least. The transitions of music genres over time. They kind of do it in a funny way when the singer sings Archangel by Burial and it slowly morphs into Avicii. And this is something I'd experienced in my own life as well. I had moments where I would listen to The Velvet Underground and the closing song After Hours, and then it would transition straight into Young Folks by Peter, Bjorn, and John, which is also on folx. And I would feel all of music history collapsing on itself in the span of like 40 years in one Spotify transition. This is not to make fun of Peter, Bjorn, and John, this is a great album. But this era of music was beginning to cause complications in my life. All of these albums I quite like, but even a meme like this seems to acknowledge that there is a time period associated with it that was limited. And I mean, some of these bands have managed to reinvent themselves in great ways, like MGMT, but those bands are still known in some way. The next wave of this music that came after, like, nobody talks about. That's because the only way I know how to call it is by the Spotify auto-generated title of Hope Beat. I haven't heard any of these songs, maybe they're collateral, but this stuff is not that great, and I don't think it will be remembered. But who knows? Maybe every album sort of has its Hope, it's Citizen Kane if we look hard enough. Hope beats OK Computer, if you would. Even an album like Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros was drawing from trying to recreate the past. This specifically being like the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour, which is referenced on the song itself. This idea of like whimsical band on the run. Whoops. And that's not the only piece of 60s media they're kind of drawing from. Their music video references the film As I Was Moving Ahead. Occasionally I saw Brief Glimpses of Beauty, which is one of my favorite films. It's basically just like 5 hours of home video footage. This movie is also referenced in one of the music videos for the Folx album. Oh wait, it's out of order. Or maybe not. Spoilers. Oh fuck, I gotta find it.
Oh.
It's referenced in Dazi Chroma and Nate Wilson's Man of Constant Sorrow music video, which kind of draws upon a few things, one being Arcade Fire, who we'll go back to shortly, because I kind of got out of order here. But Jonas Mekas was somebody who founded the Filmmakers Cooperative, the New American Cinema Group, which was a movement in the 60s to kind of create cinema that is free from producers, distributors, and investors, and wanted to sort of foster in the youth a sense of making things like, for the sake of making things. This also included the artist Dan Brockage, who some of you might know from the Face Exploding, Have a Piece Again music video, which they tribute to. I mean, these artists like kind of reappearing in this context in relation to shit that I liked as a child that is now kind of being made fun of, but still kind of seems to call upon real memories that people had. It's been very interesting for me. Like, I think even a music video like this still seems to acknowledge the true feelings that, I would get from it. And bands such as Arcade Fire, who is my favorite band in high school, who is also referenced in that previously mentioned music video. Their aesthetic was kind of like, we're gonna march into the suburbs and like wake up all the kids and like start a new society or whatever. That, once again, in Catholic suburban high school me, quite like that. I first heard it in the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, directed by Ben Stiller, who is now doing Severance. In some ways, this presentation is an examination of the movement from Secret Life of Walter Mitty to Severance. Because Severance is about being stuck in like, this eternal corporate office where your feelings are separate from your like regular life. I haven't actually watched it. But Secret Life of Walter Mitty is about breaking free from your job and going on adventures and shit. Which is something that I had experienced for most of my life with channels like Yes Theory on YouTube. Do we have any Yes Theory fans in the audience?
I know someone who has a Yes Theory tattoo.
Oh.
And went to another country to go to meetups for Yes Theory.
I had a brief moment where I like wanted to join the Yes Theory Discord and like meet up with people, but I got like, I didn't know how I was gonna pull it off in high school, and I got like worried. So
What
yeah.
is it? What is it?
It's basically this channel where they take people on like, well, the original idea was that, seek discomfort, get out of your comfort zone, try new things, which is a very honorable mission, and I still really value Yes Theory. Looking at their account recently, I found this one a little bit concerning. Because, I don't know if this is like post Mr. Beast YouTube or something, but like, we have money and we're swooping down to save you from your food job is kind of terrifying. As Bill Fay once said, all my time is lying on the factory floor. And as SCAP once said, endless assembly line extracting from you. This idea of, not being able to go on adventures because of work is something that also I found reflected in Ghosts of My Life, right? There's this chapter for Mark Fisher writing the sleeve notes for the caretaker's theoretically pure anterograde amnesia. This is the first time in a while that I had come back to the caretaker and seriously, considered their music in an emotional way, because I just remember this thumbnail being memed in music communities. I've never actually watched this video, but I think this is definitive proof that if you just meme something hard enough, you'll stop considering the artist seriously. Because with the caretaker, theoretically pure anterograde amnesia, I kind of we'll get to that actually. The ideas that it resonated with me, that being the idea of it being impossible to make new memories somehow, the idea of reset with I got a feeling of these emotions that we call back to the past rather than what's to come. And I began to see it in my own life. I have journaled for 8 years and I have kept titles for every entry. And in some ways this is both a blessing and a curse because obviously I value the memories, but it kind of does make you a little neurotic about it. And also I began to see stuff like this where you look at the top and it's about the season or a hobby or who I'm hanging out with. And then very clearly here you see that it's new daily routine. It's enough to make you cry. And I'm uh-oh. Even the one before that with Neil's day off. It's in relation to the day off.
What is Buffalo Wild Wings anal stuff?
Oh, Buffalo Wild Wings boys. Needless to say, I was feeling the nature of difference and repetition. I haven't actually read this book, but I just wanted to use it for this part here. I could feel the repetition in my work schedule and how it was affecting, the way I was remembering my time in California. I would obviously try to have memorable days anyway, but they did often blend together. And this brings us to Mark Fisher's capitalist realism. Mark Fisher has kind of had an algorithmically generated cult of personality in a way recently, which has been kind of bizarre to watch. Maybe this is just circumstantial evidence, but I went on Instagram and I would get shit like this recommended all the time. And that one has 54.3K likes, and that one has 76.8K likes. And there was one with Matty Healy of the 1975 where he name dropped him, and that had 80K likes. So he's been reappearing in culture, both here and as previously mentioned, the folx album. But there might be one thing in particular which might have brought it back, that being Disco Elysium. Do we have any Disco Elysium fans in the audience? So this game came out in 2019, and heavily references Mark Fisher's literature or calls upon it. It's also currently the #1 game on the RateYourMusic video game website.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe that speaks for itself. But it's been appearing even on that website. And the book opens up with talking about Children of Men as a metaphor. This is a movie about a world where they can no longer, have babies anymore. And it's used to kind of call upon the idea of creating anything that's new, right? The new, as it's called. As opposed to this idea that we're at the end of history, that the 21st century is just a replay of the 20th century all over again. And Mark Fisher juxtaposes this against inventions in music. Right now we're listening to jungle music, and he talks about the technology that allowed jungle music to happen. Same thing goes with Negativland, the technology that allowed plunderphonics to happen.
Oh, true.
And this is an idea that A.G. Cook also gets at in this video right here.
Yeah.
Kind of talking about the idea that all music is filtered through technology throughout all of history, and you have to consider those components before you can consider anything else. So I kind of began to wonder, with this in mind, what was defining the 2026? What would I call upon to sort of contrast this theory? And things were getting a little dire, to say the least, with social trends I noticed in the past year. One being summer 2016 nostalgia, which seemed to came perhaps again. And this one is so funny to me, especially with those albums in the bottom right corner there. A lot of iconic albums there. But at the top left, you can see A Tribe Called Quests. We got it from here, thank you for your service, which might be my favorite rap album of all time. And I just like want to imagine listening to this album while looking at the image on the right the like entire time. I think it would like literally destroy my mind. And this album in particular is kind of crazy because obviously, you know, it's related to post like the 2016 election and society after that, right? And 10 years later, I listened to it and I'm like, you know, they're still right about everything. And this brings us to acid communism. Acid Communism is considerably a more hopeful book in some ways. It's shorter, but one word we're going to focus on in the title is acid. Unicorns. This is the part where I say this is all about harm reduction. This is educational content, prevents, you know, to keep people safe. I became interested in this idea for a few reasons. One, because of the Boards of Canada album, which I previously mentioned, which kind of juxtaposes, this is up to interpretation, but people like Frank Rudolph Olson, who worked on like MKUltra and chemical warfare stuff, and you know, was dosed with LSD, and his death is still like kind of been the subject of conspiracy theories for years. And they sort of juxtapose against Albert Hoffman in Happy Cycling. That being the guy who invented LSD, and you know, created Bicycle Day, which is it's now known as. And this is a moment I think about a lot. That idea of this guy kind of getting a chemical in him that no human has ever experienced ever, and he just kind of gets on his bicycle and starts riding. I mean, it is beautiful to me, and it kind of also was juxtaposed against actual things I had encountered. One being an incident at Duquesne University where my sister went to, but also my own experiences. The second time I took acid, it almost went really badly because I got like nervous and I went on Reddit for help, which I admit I was a big Redditor at the time. So I guess in some ways Reddit, you know, was the end-all source of knowledge for these situations. And I kind of found these like intense posts that I felt like I downloaded into my brain in the moment and was like, you know, that really got to me, and then I just went for a walk and it was okay. But that idea of like even a situation like that compared to now has been pretty interesting to me, because one thing I wanted to make a video of on YouTube was this sort of idea of like how drugs can also sort of be capitalized in a way, like, you know, doing them for fun and on the memories that you get from them versus like doing them to cope with work, which I found myself doing more often. And I don't think I'm alone here. Maybe there's a lot of headlines about these studies, you know, the tendency to Gen Z to get high at work, but also millennials. It says 34% of Gen Z and 29% of millennials are getting high at work currently. And I sometimes I forget what's up next, and then I actually click go forward, and I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, so work was getting to me, to say the least. And I thought a lot about time. Time. There we go. That's the connection. And before all of this, before I even went to grad school, I had been in this very basement, high on acid again. And it sort of did set the stage to come. I mean, I don't even know if I should dive into every single thing I'm trying to get at here. But I thought of, you know, that trip in terms of my life, right? We were in this basement, and then we went out to go watch Trap. And in some ways, like, these were like different phases. Like, going to see Trap was like entering the real world, which is ridiculous if you've seen Trap, but it forced me to like kind of like, you know, be out in civilization. And then I came back and I found I was changed. I was a different man. And along the way, every artist I had ever encountered was sending packages from the past into the present to guide me and make sure I didn't lose my way. I could see this chain of artists that we had encountered all sort of like cultivating one statement that I would follow sort of not get scared at any point. And I mean, you know, it was fitting to kind of consider like these different periods of time in relation to my own self, because that had always been a kind of trope that I love in media. These being, you know, my favorite album and my favorite book at the time, Slaughterhouse-5 and Doopy Time. Oh, shout out to Ace, who showed me Doopy Time for the first time.
What?
Yeah. I can't believe that it's had that much of an impact on you.
We listened to it in this basement right now, like, or right in the past. Oh my god, I'm already getting lost. But the idea of getting lost in time was always a type of media I really loved. And it was one that I kind of had come to encounter in grad school again with George A. Louis Borges and Ficciones. This became my favorite book, I think, because it spoke to a lot of those things I encountered here in this room, but in a time before like LSD was even invented. Like just a guy who kind of looked at life and art this way. Am I fucking up by like flinging the dongle?
Yes.
I was beginning to notice it. You know, one idea in his work is always the idea of labyrinths, right? Both labyrinths of time and labyrinths of art. One great illustration I think of that is the Library of Babel, which might be his most famous story. I remember I encountered this as a kid with a like kind of a fan-created website that exists where you can go to any page and see like you know, all combinations of text that can possibly exist. And you know, that was speaking to the nature of like the sum of books and kind of finding one piece of knowledge in that giant labyrinth of words. And the other one that really spoke to me in terms of like, you know, these connections was the Aleph, which is about a guy who goes into this person he hates basement and sees like everything in history all at once, and then comes back and tries to capture it in writing and can't do it. And in some ways that's what I'm trying to do now as well. But it was speaking to this idea of, you know, witnessing all of cause and effect, and the idea that if one witnessed all of cause and effect at once, it would be fatal for us. Which comes from Andrei Tarkovsky's Sculpting in Time, Reflections on the Cinema. If you don't know who Andrei Tarkovsky is, he's sort of like I Show Speed. He was a 70s Russian director. This is sort of the, to me, the seminal book on film, and captures what most film should go for, which is imprinted time. Time not being history or evolution, but the state in which we experience time, you know, the things we notice and the ways it feels to us, and kind of sculpting that into film. And we do this through creating these poetic connections with whatever we witness in our era, that being compared to like haikus, right? Noticing the pond and the frog and the splash all at once. This is also an idea that I think is best illustrated in avant-garde composer John Cage, who you might know from his famous piece 433, which is just entirely silence to draw your attention to the environment around you. But even with other pieces, like In a Landscape and its collection of music, I would go to like different locations, put it on, and see how the sounds interacted with the piece itself, and it would both draw my attention to like everything around me instead of it just being objectively about the atmosphere the artist was trying to create. And he kind of chalked these sensations up to divine influences, despite him being an atheist, which he called all things that happen in creation, and the tendency that noticing these things has to create a sense of awe, if you would, which my mom had kind of cultivated me into thinking about with sort of giving me these two books right here. One being Big Magic, which is about, you know, not doing art for a career, but doing it for fun. And the other being about what I have sort of described here with time, like, you know, being in awe at everything that has led us to where we are now. And I think they do a good job at the end of kind of summing it up into one word, that being systems, and the regulation of systems in our lives. I think this is an idea that I saw reflected in Acid Communism, now to finally fucking actually talk about the book. But there's this really beautiful section in the book where Mark Fisher takes a story about a kid on a cruise as a, you know, in the 60s, and hearing a song by the Byrds on the radio and thinking to himself, this is happening now, which is a sensation that I, you know, felt was true in most of my life. as a kid, I would kind of have these moments, like typically at like sleepovers, where I would go, I love life, life is amazing. Usually when I was running really fast, which I don't know if that's the secret, but the, surfing good?
Yeah. Okay.
I also kind of felt the whole, you know, this is happening now, a few minutes before this, so we did it in some way. Oh fuck, I'm out of order. And what Mark Fisher kind of does with this paragraph is that he takes it and analyzes like all things that are going on in the paragraph itself to make it happen. That being, you know, like what was allowed for the working class and the new technology of the radio and, you know, the sort of experimentation that was happening in music in the era. And this finally brings us to Capitalism Schizophrenia by Deleuze and Boudry. Some of you might be familiar with this one because of an artist known as So Great and Powerful. And is there anybody here who doesn't know So Great and Powerful? Wow, that's actually incredible. And if somebody is watching in the future who doesn't know who this is a pony musician who would basically take the show and kind of you know, connect these dots between episodes and sort of the philosophy he was studying at the time. The My Little Pony also being heavily sampled in folx, which I started off with. And he would do this connection to sort of explain complex ideas such as territory in the context of like a cartoon. You know, Dashy Harp-Swarming Eve, which heavily references the episode of the same name, and then takes those like ideas and ties them into Deleuze's exploration of territory. And he would, you know, sort of makes these juxtapositions of words through sampling, like history, tomorrow, spring, and link them to these concepts. This is something I was thinking about when we watched Sonic Rainboom again at the con we just attended, which, you know, in itself is calling upon other connections such as like Greek myth and Narcissus and Icarus at the end, and also the juxtaposition of that against like, you know, Rarity being like full of herself, but Rainbow Dash doing something for other people. And I quite enjoy, I had this last slide I kind of entered. I quite enjoyed when we read the first chapter and saw that, you know, they mentioned even rainbows being a machine in itself, which, you know, must have been the inspiration for making such juxtapositions in the first place. It is quite funny to like look at this and kind of see these leftist critical theorists and philosophers being called upon in relation to, you know, My Little Pony and you know, something that's sort of being defined by Hasbro. But the narrative of Lauren Faust against Hasbro, I think, has become a classic story to me. Like Lauren Faust trying to stand her ground against the suits to keep her ideas in the mix. And it's those ideas of like, you know, somebody who I do think is a great artist kind of up against the corporate battle that has been reflected in 21st century art a lot. Particularly to me in Vaporwave. These are some of my favorite albums, and they all seem to reference like the idea of angels and the machine. It's also something you see in the album by Cat's Millionaire, Fun Fun Fun, when she describes her love and frustration with My Little Pony in two separate songs with the same name. And I think it's a very real emotion, because in the latter one, you know, she seems very celebratory of the show, and in the first one, she seems to see it as like a product. And I think that's what makes like this album so good, is its ability to like, you know, sincerely love My Little Pony, but also look at it in the context of television and, you know, the actual process of like, you know, these shows being made and becoming whatever they are. Becoming being an idea that Escap also references in The Sorceress Girl. Yeah. Becoming animals, wasp the orchid, orchid to the winner. And to understand becoming, we have to look at the concept of machines. Machines being the main idea put in Capitalism Schizophrenia at the start. That being that everything is a machine. You know, it's not even a metaphor. If you think of it in terms of organs, all things are connected that way. And they relate this to sort of experiences that people like Judge Schreiber, who believed that God was turning them into a woman, right, via sunbeams, and that being its sort of own machine in its own right. And this is sort of related to the I need to find myself. this is related to the idea of delirium, of course, because in the same way that Mark Fisher examines the moment in acid communism, he explores delirium in relation to all the things that are leading to people to think what they think, and describes it in terms of a film, right? Where a son is listening to their father talk about education and religion, and then the mind goes to the stories of the Bible and what those mean, and it all starts to start to overwhelm you. It was an idea which reminded me of a song by Stereolab called Rockage, also known as Sun Ra, which basically just says, we need so many damn things to keep our lives going. It's the breakthrough versus the breakdown, schizophrenic versus the paranoid, the molecular versus the molar. Molecular being the small numbers, the micro multiplicities, and molar being the large numbers, everything in terms of like the biggest possible thing in society. The lines of escape versus the organs of capture. It's the difference between what people create for each other, right? The desiring machines, versus like, you know, the paranoia of mass society overall. And we can kind of look at how the mass society comes about in terms of, you know, going back to the start of life, the body of the earth, and the ways territory was formed, and how those cause and effects seem to do like all play out at once, and kind of cause either, you know, this sort of revelation or a sense of terror. And this is something I think is really well depicted in certain movies, such as A Woman Under the Influence, or If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, which is about, you know, wives who are kind of in, you know, these domestic situations that sort of cause them to break down in some ways, or, you know, are kind of not taken seriously. But it's also something you see in the movie Donnie Darko, which, you know, speaks of a teenager feeling the changes of Reagan society and sort of losing his mind in a way. This kind of happens in all of Richard Kelly's movies, but I think Donnie Darko is the best one. Yeah. And it's something I also think is best depicted in Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is, I don't know, has anybody seen the movie here? Yeah. My dad never liked the movie because he called it the Jack Nicholson show. And you know, he let me to read the book. He gave me his signed copy that on the back said like the eyes are the windows to the soul or whatever, because he had been gifted it from a classmate. And basically the difference in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the book, versus the movie, is that the basically he would come into work at the mental institution high on acid, and he would see that the problems of the patients really were just problems of the world overall. There's like a juxtaposition between Jack Nicholson's character McMurphy leading the show and this Native American character Chief, who kind of witnesses this battle happening in a mental hospital, right? And Chief's delusion is that he sort of sees these wires coming in and taking over everything. And this is an idea that is sort of reflected in a work where Ken Kesey is the main character himself, that being the electric Kool-Aid acid test. This is a book about the merry pranksters, who are these like hippies, right? Who go on a bus and venture across America and leave society and just, you know, try to have good times. This in itself following a long chain of influence, them coming from the Beatniks with Jack Kerouac on the Road, and that leading to the Grateful Dead. And On the Road was pretty notable to me because one line after the lines of escape, there's also the mention of Jack Kerouac himself being somebody who tried to take flight and go into, like, you know, new realms, but kind of was eventually taken over by these dreams of America. And this was really interesting to me because, like, Jack Kerouac also appears in pony music, that being Lesolad Pony's Artemis, which samples Jack Kerouac's Old Angel Midnight in Allen Ginsberg's Supermarket in California, which in some ways is fitting for the book itself, because these hippies are kind of drawing upon cartoon characters that they like, that being the Marvel comics of the time. And each of them sort of forms this new identity, and they go out into this desert to live in Edge City and speak of this god known as Cosmo, who connects all things via wires. And in the midst of it all, are trying to achieve kairos, the experience, which in baby invasion terms is known as the endless now. Some of you might know kairos because it's used in the Beautiful Heart remaster video. I never knew why they like changed it. But somehow it made it connect to here. Did they know more than us?
What did he see?
To achieve kairos, they were essentially making a movie. And although the movie ended up sucking and they never used it, they took it and created these new multimedia experiences at the time known as the acid tests, where they would basically just invite people to these locations that they either had in people's houses or in actual venues, and get people to try acid and be like, yeah, don't like lose your minds. That was the test. It was a little fucked up in some ways, but it also led to the Grateful Dead, who would come and perform at these shows and built up their following via that way. This, of course, changing music in some ways alongside, the spread of acid and its influence on music at the time of acid rock, and the way that came to change the Beatles with Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper's, that influencing all of music since in many ways. The Grateful Dead also being referenced on the folx album by Friends Zone. And then, that was a lot of shit about random things, but all you really need to know is that they partied so hard that the FBI had to stop them. There's a lot of great art about why the hippie movement failed. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Steely Dan's The Royal Scam, all great shit. But, I'm not here to say, we need to recreate the hippie movement somehow. Because the book really isn't even about what they caused. I think the thing that has always been most meaningful to me about that book is that it's about this group of really distinct people who are kind of in these crazy states all the time because they're just fucking high, but still seem to navigate the egos and wishes they all have, right? And lead to these beautiful moments despite all their fighting. I singled one out in particular where after these people sort of wanting to kill each other, it just goes down to the lake and they see each other, and it's described as the stars being a bridge leading straight up into heaven. And that, at the end of the day, is what I find most meaningful. These situations where people are in this sort of heaven on earth, which is something I encountered in another book also related to drugs, that being Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. The Doors of Perception being about the sort of mix between artistic expression, religious expression, and drug experience and the ways of viewing the world that comes from each. And how, when that is combined with witnessing cause and effect, can cause those states where life is amazing or life is terrible. That idea of that being religious was also one I became sort of fixated on. Amber gave me this book on metaphor, which is this great essay about metaphor being at the heart of religion, and sort of, phrases such as God is love being complex in their simplicity, and that being the basis for all religion, following those lines of thought and finding these really complicated metaphors that have been formed to describe all things that go on in life. I mean, that's sort of the basis of their longevity, right? And this is what is so interesting about groups like the Merry Pranksters, is that they essentially have formed their own religion and sort of get the same experiences that those religious people were having through whatever the hell they were doing. I mean, they literally invented their own language, just based off social interaction, right? And going back to Deleuze and Capitalism Schizophrenia, I think they achieved the state of rhizomatic thinking. Rhizomes being this network of mushrooms that has no beginning or end, which is juxtaposed or contrasted, from cause and effect. The tree of lineage, right? This thing led to that thing, which led to this thing, while rhizomes are and. As they said about Old Man River, he don't plant potatoes, he don't plant cotton. Them that plants them is soon forgotten, but Old Man River, he just keeps rolling along. That is the essence of the idea. And Old Man River in itself was a jazz standard, right? Which was sort of the basis for Kerouac later on, which kind of came from the original jazz hipsters, right? Not the hipsters we've come to associate with 2010, but the hipsters of the 1940s and 1950s. In particular, there's one who I may have mentioned a few times at this con, that being Sun Ra, whose biography I've recently read, that being Space is the Place. And he, was doing essentially what those hippies were doing. It's even referenced in the book as being the basis for the Flower Children of the 60s. He would come up with this new identity, that being Sun Ra. He changed his name. And he told the story of being taken to Saturn by aliens, and that being the basis for all the music he would make. This is obviously, people debate if this happened or not, but I was really struck by the fact that, he was this avid reader who would stay up all night and read, and kind of just read whatever the hell that entertained him, right? He would go to, any part of the book and just start from there to sort of generate these different ideas. So I have to switch to his music itself to get a sense. He would just do this with his band too, they would sort of constantly reinvent their names. And they're often interrelated words, usually related to like space or Egypt or, the one that always catches my eye is like the brief Disney, I don't know how brief it is, but the Disney Odyssey Orchestra. And these are all like, maybe except for Disney, pretty interrelated topics. And just going through his discography, right? I have been struck by the fact that each album is sort of an adventure in its own right. They follow a similar format, but just by changing one word, you can generate a new image. And this is also an idea that was often associated with Bob Dylan, right? Him being multiple people who could always reinvent himself. And in the process, both these people, kind of caused these musical revolutions, right? Like I chose an example from Sun Ra, how they played for a college town and the customers fled for the door, but all the college students later showed up wanting to hear it. And that's essentially what they did. They just moved through this difficult time in the 30s, 40s, and 50s to find, the places they could play and, express their music against these limitations. And it all kind of culminated in the 60s with The Village, where the previously mentioned Jonas Mekas and Stan Brakhage were also a part of. All of this led to me to come up with the idea of scenology, as in, I've scenology, which is the memory of set counts of people in space and time. As Destroyer once said, I am proud to be a part of this number. It's the groups that have existed in time and space. Space being the place being the Echospace. There we go. Echospace is an album that I would listen to in California a lot when I was on transit on the buses. I didn't have a car, so whenever I wanted to kind of go someplace alone, I would commit to the 2-hour bus ride and put on these albums. And it was very fitting because it calls upon kind of these labyrinthian cityscapes, right? And the whole album could be seen as kind of navigating that to get to a sense of warmth. And I felt that warmth many times in independent theaters around the city. One time I went to go see Stan Brakhage and Phil Solomon with a live orchestra, and another time I went to go see Robert Ash's Perfect Lives at Grammy Video. And I got all of these video websites, and these were all great, but I can rewatch these anytime. The one that was really special was Ryan Tricarden's Weather Line, which could only be watched in this situation, this art exhibit that had only existed, I went the last day, so I got the last chance to see
I
it.
envy you right now.
I'm jealous.
But in many ways, do we have any ever Ryan Tricarden fans here?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there we go, we got the 3. Ryan Tricarden's movies are about this very subject. Something like Ivy Area is about area, being the person who cultivates area for expression, and then Weatherline being about property, the property battles that allow people to hang out and all of that. And I think the best way to kind of capture how that is always in flux is with the Friday night. The Friday night where every second is a highlight. To me, Friday night is something like a David Cage game where one decision can cause an endless amount of end games if you're not careful enough. There's this end game of the Friday night, we're caught online, right? There's one where you pay $40 to enter a club. There's another where there's like nothing to do at all, and all the places are gone. Back rooms in theaters now. But I remember we went to this one place called, maybe I shouldn't say the title. It's called the Zero Lounge. It says it right there. This is Y2K themed. I thought it was pretty interesting because it was like not just Y2K themed, but like Y2K childhood themed, but also kind of anachronistic in many ways. But it's not even just that place which is going for it. You know, I go to this other place which is 70s themed, maybe not as explicitly, but then you go to the DJ set and it's just 70s music. The only time I think I felt like I was in contemporary time was when I went to this back room at this one club where they were playing dubstep. Of course, we associate dubstep with the 2010s, but that's like the most recent nostalgia, so it kind of feels most contemporary, which is something I had encountered with Nina Geraci's I Love My Computer. Has anybody heard this album?
Yes.
Hell yeah. Okay, this is my favorite album of last year. And I will admit, the first time I listened to it, I was kind of like tired of, you know, this new wave of nostalgia that you find in electronic music. But it really did touch me. You know, it was about very specific things that can only happen with technology. One in particular being the song iPod Touch, which is about, you know, finding obscure songs with what you have and that kind of changing a bus ride forever, which is what I would experience with, like, you know, Vampire Weekends or Edward Sharpe and all that. But as much as I love that album, I did ask myself, what is truly 2026, you know? And what heightened the sensation was listening to all these DJ sets I really loved. These albums sort of really guided me through grad school, right? And they would lift my spirits, but they would also come with this cost of like, damn, like something that good was playing somewhere and somewhen. Like, how do you find something like that? Where is it? Does it even happen anymore? It's a sensation I think you get from any book about music. Even before I went to grad school, I listened to Our Band Could Be Your Life, or I read it while listening to the bands, at least. And, you know, they talk about the indie underground that led up to Nirvana. Nirvana being sort of this tipping point of, you know, conflict against MTV. But, which is also something Mark Fisher talks about in Capitalism Realism as well. And it's a sensation I also got from the DJ artists of like house in the 80s with Frankie Knuckles and Larry Levan with disco in the 70s, and places like Paradise Garage where people, you know, described it as a heaven of sorts. Another artist being referenced by Mark Fisher in Acid Communism. To be honest, it was also something I got from thinking about MKUltra in a way. MKUltra and RateYourMusic core and the Discord communities of music in the 2010s, I thought were kind of paradoxical in a way, because they seemed to call upon so many albums from the past. But, you know, with modern technology, like, listening to that much amount of music had become kind of a new thing. So they were finding new ways to bring it into culture in some ways. In the Airplane Over the Sea being one album in particular, which I feel like has traveled 4 decades in sort of its own variety of contexts. But I'm fond of these albums because I think one could understand more about 2010s culture by listening to Death Grips or Blade than they could from most things. And I think it does sculpt in time the 2010s in many ways. Same goes for PC music, that also being a heavy part of folks. But I remember on a Rate Your Music forum thread, people were talking about the nostalgia, Ghost of My Life, you know, Mark Fisher concepts. And somebody offered PC music as a contrasting concept, you know, music that had only been allowed to get created in the 2010s that was not kind of resembling anything that had come before, but rather it was like, you know, progressing other ideas that we had previously encountered. Yeah. PC music also kind of getting its mainstream moment in summer of 2024 with Brat Summer, which now kind of also, I think, haunts us in some ways. I mean, they made a movie about it, but maybe that's like this new form of like A24 generated like hauntings that like it's getting confusing to say the least. But needless to say, every age has its own poetry, every stage circumstantial of history. It's sculpting in time. And how does one sculpt in time in 2026? It's a question I often relate to the book Ulysses, right, which is referenced in a few of these books. in particular, it was mentioned in the Sun Ra book how these jazz musicians were trying to capture.
This shit right
Yeah, I was gonna pull it up, but Hazel's actually reading this right now, and we were talking about it. I have only just begun to read it myself, but
This shit is fucking hard.
But essentially, what like the idea of the book is the sort of this ultimate sculpting in time is to sort of go to the highest degree of capturing like the nanoseconds of a period, right? So what I ended up asking myself was, what is the 21st century Ulysses? And I don't know if everybody will like the answer, but I arrived at it's home stuff. That's why it was so mind-blowing when Hazel was talking about Ulysses, and she turned to me and was like, yeah, my friends call it the modern Homestuck. Or no, wait.
Holy shit. Yeah, James Joyce time travel.
My friends say Homestuck is the modern Ulysses. And I had already made this presentation, so I was like,
Wow.
are there many people who think this? To find out, I kind of looked up somebody who immediately agrees with me, which is what I think the internet is good for. So shout out Diesel and friends who talked about Homestuck being this idea of post-postmodernism, which was been reflected in the mainstream, that being everything everywhere all at once, and like Spider-Verse being, you know, like multiverse stories combining all these different aspects of culture. I liked that this person related it to Infinite Jest, because that's sort of back in the zeitgeist and always comes with these associations of like, you know, talking about like lip bros and all of that as opposed to the actual work itself. Because I'm sure we all know that Homestuck has its associations. But I think by coming back to it, I've been able to kind of cultivate a new appreciation for what it's going for. Because essentially it's about these 4 kids who, you know, kind of pass into like are all internet friends and sort of start their own journey and then pass over into like this wider network of these alien trolls. And what I found was interesting about that was that it was such a good model for capitalism schizophrenia in many ways. You know, it starts off in terms of the family, right? Like these kids' conflicts with their relatives. And in Capitalism Schizophrenia, you know, it kind of focuses on that, and then the way that everything that happens in the family is, you know, all of history playing out at once in social dynamics. Because after they go past the family, they meet the trolls, right? Who are kind of involved in these complicated relationships with each other. And all of them are kind of traveling in separate like phases of time to kind of, you know, get past the ghosts that have been haunting their lives, right? And kind of form this new network of, you know, these online relationships that allow them to beat their code and complete this video game they're playing where if you die in the game, you die for real. But what really struck me about the story was the way it sort of depicted certain things about the internet in a way that I hadn't encountered in previous literature. I mean, there's this one moment where Kanaya sort of is guided by another character's game facts post, right? Which I thought was sort of poetic in a way because there was somebody who took this character's username on the Creepypasta wiki and was like the first person to like give me writing advice, right? And that was like felt to this like in the modern day. Essentially, Homestuck is about kids becoming Discord server or MSN to be more contemporary. You know, it's this idea that one could become websites now, which became pretty interesting to me. In some ways, I was seeing how YouTube was affecting my life. You know, I made one video for school, and then I was like, I'm gonna make one video for myself. And then now I've been having dreams about, like, YouTube. I had a dream that Mark Fisher's Post-Capitalist Desire was about the effect iCarly had on children. And in some ways, iCarly was having an effect on me. I had the iCarly dream in my system by making one video, which seems to be existing a lot with the youth nowadays. You ask any kid in the United Kingdom or America, according to this graph, and they say they want to become a YouTuber. And that kind of brings me to my final soapbox in many ways. If people are going to become YouTubers, I want you to listen to me and think about the future of YouTube. In this household, we have watched many different eras of YouTube. In every era you go, you see, you know, what was popular at the time. And it is very different, and it like does bring me back to these different states of mind that were cultivated to me through whatever was being recommended to me. And it made me imagine that there was kind of a new YouTube yet to be created. And it made me think about all the other YouTube types that have been invented that were sort of their own strange thing. That being like the ARG, or the ASMR video, or the YouTube poop. And also the Warrior Cats multi-animator projects, which maybe isn't a new format, but is a type of creation that is very admirable. And if people were going to be influenced by YouTube, I think that would be a good thing in some ways, because it is like an independent platform where people can do anything. And I think just by considering all these different influences in the past, that was the grounds to sort of lead into that, right? I think the only movies that sort of tap into this idea of how YouTube or any website affects us now are ones like Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, which is about seeing 2 minutes into the future from your computer, sort of reflecting the effect that it can create on us. But also films like Castration Movie Part 2, I think have touched upon this. This being one of the only films that has felt super recent in many ways, even though it in itself calls upon the past, such as Chelsea Girls and Andy Warhol and sort of 60s underground that existed in New York City at the time. Castration Movie also reflecting capitalism schizophrenia, castration being an idea to be rejected, something that speaks to higher numbers and the efforts to organize men and women in certain ways. I bring this movie up as well because it ends with the song Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And that is a song which also appears at the end of the folx album. And in many ways, I don't know if this is just coincidence or like if there, I don't know, it's just a weird coincidence to me, right? Especially because my dad, listens to this album a lot, and the song itself has always been one I've really loved. So when I encountered them, it did move me a lot. And it spoke to me of the idea of these circles of history that have happened and these different scenes that occur that sort of repeat each other. And the idea that there could be like, the line of escape out of this cycle and enter into the new that people have said is gone and is yet to be invented. But really, when I look at the things I've listed, whether it be the past or the present, they both speak to the things that have defined me in this current period. And they give me that sense of awe and joy, and want me to go making things despite all the time I spend at work now, right? And in the end, they are the things that also remind me of spring 2026, and woo! I'm very thankful for that, and I'm appreciative that you allowed me to share. Thank you for watching my presentation.
Just died as you were ending the presentation.
Amazing.
Wow.
Amazing.
Does that mean it saves a video?
Wonderful.
I hope so.
Woo!
You would be a terrible professor.
I want you as my professor.
Good stuff. That was incredible. Thank you so much.
It was exactly an hour.
Alright, let's watch Sonic.
6 minutes over. But who's keeping track?
Wow. That was like
the clock is keeping track, not me.
That was beautiful. Tim, can you be my professor?
I'm fucking sweaty. Knees weak.
I'm sorry.
Can we do a presentation?
What?
Yeah, you guys go up next. Alright, up next we got Giuliano and Chad.
You enjoy it? I got a little nervous. I agree.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I have to read all of this.
Yeah. I know you probably like it.
But that was one I was worried about because I was like, I feel like I was like, oh, it's probably not true. Well, I forgot to say that. That's like the only album where I felt like somebody had like lived in my life.
You did say that.
I did say that?
Yeah.
Like I say,
right at the beginning. You know what this reminded me of?
That's true. I mean, I guess the whole thing is that.
That's what like Tinder's been talking about this whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was like, when I had to like cite, I was already like 5 years away, so like miles away from home, so I can't go back now.
My IRL friend Demi really likes that, like the PCP and stuff like that. Oh, no.
Wait, presentation started.
Presentation, guys.
This is called What I Learned at the Bowling Alley.
It's been a long ass day. I can't believe I
really long day.
finally get to lay off some stress for
Hey.
bowling.
Yeah, I really like bowling in the bowling alley.
Dude, me too, man.
Yeah, hey, nice to meet you, man. Are you here for bowling today?
Yeah, we just came over, so hopefully maybe we can do a bowl together after. But I'm going. I usually like to start solo.
Yeah, hey, yeah, me too. I'm at this alley. Did you get?
I always get lane 22. So.
Wait, but I'm at lane 22.
No, I mean I reserve. I just talked to the lady at the desk, so like this is the one I always reserve. So.
No, Jay-Z?
Yeah.
Jay-Z at the desk?
Yeah.
She goes by Jay-Z?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always in 22, so I don't even like.
But I just asked her, I was in 22, I just spent $40 on this lane for an hour.
But I don't have to like explicitly reserve it. Like, did you use the website? Because
No, I paid her money and I said, can I get lane 22? And Jay-Z was like, yeah.
I mean, it was probably like 12 or something, or maybe like you can have the next one's free.
I mean,
if you want.
Listen, I paid $40 for this today. I'm at lane 22. It's my birthday, and I'm not gonna let anyone ruin it.
Like,
I like to bowl.
this is my lane.
Do you see my shoes right now? I like to bowl. This is my lane today. It
Listen,
might be your lane tomorrow, but it's not your lane today.
Every day of the week. Sometimes every weekend. I come to this bowling alley.
Okay?
I'm always late. It's not something that needs to be like usually if people come here, you can ask anyone. They know that that's me.
Well, I appreciate you being honest with me about all this, but it's my birthday. And I really need to be in lane 22 because 22 is when my birthday is.
Listen,
my birthday is on February 22nd.
It's someone's birthday every day.
Nah, I'm fine.
Everywhere. And they always let me.
If you get this every weekend, I'm getting it today. Yeah, well.
You just fucking touch me.
You want to? This is my lane.
This is my lane.
This is my lane.
It's not a question.
You want to? You know that little animation where those bowling guys get shot in the head when you get a strike? That's gonna be you after this.
Listen, everybody knows me here. I can cause a lot of big trouble for you.
Yeah, me too.
If you listen,
Yeah.
any alley you go to forever.
My mom's name is Allie.
My mom's name is Becca.
My mom. Oh! Hey!
You're rolling off. Get another
Listen,
lane.
I'm gonna give you one more chance to get out of lane 22, or else this is your life.
I'm gonna give you one more chance to get out of lane 22, or this is your life.
Oh! Okay! Oh! And scene. Are there any more presentations?
Let's party!
Let's party! Yay!
TCT presents.
It's procrastination presents. I'm not familiar with those. Is that the one? Is that the one I was going off for was like the monkey drones crowd people.
Yeah.
Is that them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember I wasn't as into that as B because I had seen some of them, but I forgot what it was actually like the collective.
Yeah.